The honourable member for Thornhill had a point of privilege. I'm now ready to hear her point of privilege.
I'm rising on that question of privilege that I rose on earlier, and it is about the occupation that took place in the Confederation building this week. And you probably know, and you may have heard by now, Madam Speaker, that a group of 100 protesters in an orchestrated and coordinated fashion entered the Confederation building and undertook an occupation of that building. And while these events occurred on Tuesday, it is in the subsequent days that additional details have come to light, which I would respectfully submit as a means to my question of privilege, and that it satisfies the timeliness requirement. According to the news reports published on CBC's website even on Tuesday morning, quote, the demonstration started around 8:45 a.m. and the protesters said that they would allow MPs with offices in the building to pass through the crowd, but those MPs would have to listen to demonstrators' demands on the way in. Officers of the Parliamentary Protection Service and the Ottawa Police were on the scene asking people if they had any business inside the building before letting them in. And by 10 a.m., the protesters were removed from the building where they were chanting outside. The police and the PPS members intercepted and then released 14 protesters without charges. End quote. However, in the subsequent days, Madam Speaker, additional news reports featuring additional comments and confessions by the protesters' organizers came to light. On Wednesday, Politico published a piece with an interview with a protest organizer named Rachel Small, whose goal was, quote, it was to interrupt the daily business of Parliament by not letting MPs walk through these marble hallways, end quote. The Globe and Mail.
Having a hard time hearing the member. I'm going to ask the Sergeant at Arms to go and check what's going on in the hall to see if they can quiet that down. I also want to just remind members that when we go through points of privilege, questions of privilege, the rule of the chair is to decide the matter of merits priority over all other business, which I have done, except for depending on what the House is used to. But also, we need to make sure that that it's a brief summary of what has transpired, and so that I can determine whether or not we need to move on, and whether or not others want to provide other information to this. I also just want to check. I see there is a raised hand. I'm not sure if it's a question of privilege. If it's on the question of privilege or a point of order. So the honour member for Battleford's Lloydminster.
Madam Speaker, it's just to have the floor once the member for Thornhill is done on this point of privilege.
Perfect. So the honourable member for Thornhill. Sorry, another point of order, the honourable member for Timmins James Bay.
Madam Speaker, I just want to go back to the point you just made, that a point of privilege is supposed to be something that's of substantive. The issue here is whether or not it's being used to filibuster and interrupt
order
other members. Now, we know the person heckling me who wants women to go to backstreet abortionists, she can take her turn. The issue here is the interruption of the work of the House of Commons by the false use of a point of privilege. Again,
I just want to remind members to please be respectful. I just want to ask the honourable member if she can get to indicate the point of order, that the point of privilege, the question of privilege she has brought forward, in order to make sure that I have a full understanding of it. But again, as briefly as it should be a brief summary and not take hours to speak about. I have another point of order, sorry, the honourable member for Bow River.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The comment that was just made by the member for the NDP, I would like to have him apologize and withdraw that comment, Madam Speaker. It was totally out of line, totally unacceptable comment to be made in this House.
Yeah, I just asked the honourable member to withdraw the comment.
I withdraw, but they voted against
I would just ask members to please be respectful and not add more to what they had to say. I had to do this yesterday as well. I would also ask the Honourable from St. Albert Edmonton, again, he thinks that I'm not hearing what he's saying, and I certainly do hear what he says. And so it's very problematic. And so what the issue that I raised was because when I first started the point of privilege was I should have read a document to speak about the question of privilege and how people bring those forward. And so I forgot to do that. So I just wanted to bring it forward at that point just to indicate that it is a brief summary of what has transpired. The honourable member, knowing that it's a short day, the honourable member for Thornhill.
Madam Speaker, I've spoken for just a couple of moments to give you context, and I will not be silenced by that member about the personal safety of members of this House and his toxic masculinity in here. The thing that he accuses others of doing. But, Madam Speaker, I'm going to continue on this context because it's important. And it is not only my privilege that is breached, but it is everybody that has an office in the Confederation building and those who tried to access the parliamentary precinct. And I have lots of examples of where this has been heard in this House and in committee. But on Wednesday evening, I understand it, also the Western Standard published an insightful piece on the protest. And this is where that member should be ashamed of himself. The organization the protest was supported. The organization who protested was supported. The support was provided by New Democrats. Shameful. The article opens as follows. Quote, a group of approximately 130 Jewish Canadians took over Parliament Hill's Confederation building Tuesday morning in support of Palestine, demanding an arms embargo on Israel. 3 New Democrats, the member for Edmonton Strathcona, the member for Hamilton Centre, the member for Winnipeg Centre, joined the 100 protesters occupying the lobby of that building, where members of Parliament have offices, where about 30 of them stayed outside. The article quotes later a lady named Mrs. Small. 3 MPs came down, said Small, naming 3 NDP MPs. The member for Winnipeg Centre said that she was so proud to be there. And I'm not trying to speak on her behalf, but I was very touched by that. End quote. Madam Speaker, these subsequent interviews and these things that we've read in the news later, that came to light later, since the events of Tuesday morning, which I will submit also form the basis of a breach of privilege and equally from the basis of the timeliness necessary in bringing this point of privilege forward. My own parliamentary offices are in that building. In fact, they're the first door on the right when you walk in that building. And it was an effort to paralyze the workings of Parliament. And it was essentially directed at anybody in that building. And it's hard to think that it wasn't directed at members right here or right there on the first floor. With the protesters' true motivations only coming to light, not to mention that they were seemingly aided by New Democrat MPs. Shameful. And that's what's compelled me to rise on this question of privilege. Our own members, the members of this House of Commons, impeding the work of parliamentarians to get into their office, to have meetings in their office, to have meetings cancelled in their office, to have those who come to the front door not be able to even walk through the front door of Parliament Hill. That's why I'm raising this member. The House of Commons procedure in practice states that on page 107, quote, in order to fulfill their parliamentary duties, members should be able to go about their parliamentary business undisturbed. And speakers have consequently upheld that right of the House to the services of its members, free from intimidation and obstruction and interference. End quote. The parliamentary privilege in Canada, the second edition, meanwhile, comments that on page 176, quote, no impediment should be placed on a member in going about his or her parliamentary business, whether in the House, on the way to the House, or on the way home. Indeed, Madam Speaker, Boskin Gagnon, at page 86, remind us that, quote, the denial of access of members to the parliamentary precinct has been found to constitute contempt of the House on several occasions, end quote. It might be helpful to pause here, Madam Speaker, and recall the definition of the parliamentary precinct, which this very much falls within. it is the offices of members of Parliament. Quote, on page 163 of Mango, the parliamentary precinct is endorsed by, quote, in the parliamentary sense, the precincts are the premises of the House of Commons, the Senate, occupied from time to time for their corporate purposes. It includes those premises where each House, through its Speaker, exercises physical control to enable the members to perform their parliamentary work without obstruction or interference, end quote. That includes the Confederation Building, where access was denied or meant to be denied on Tuesday morning, and then with subsequent media reports coming out after about who was involved in those protests. And it is the intention here of the NDP organized protesters, which was revealed in those media interviews, which is critical because on page 60 in Baskin-Gagnon, it explains that, quote, any conduct which offends the authority or the dignity of the House, even though no breach of any specific privilege may have been committed, it is referred to as a contempt of the House.
Exactly.
Contempt may be an act of omission, and it does not have to actually obstruct and impede the House or a member. It merely has to have the tendency to produce such results, end quote. And I find that, I find that piece very important, Madam Speaker. They put 100 people in the building at an entryway, and I can guarantee you that they did that because they had the intention to obstruct the free passage of anyone looking to get in, members of Parliament or those they were conducting business with. And turning back to the prohibition on obstructing and impeding members of Parliament on the Hill, Baskin-Gagnon expand on this principle on page 110. Quote, in the circumstances where members claim to be physically obstructed, impeded, or interfered with, or intimidated in the performance of their parliamentary functions, the Speaker is apt to find that a prima facie breach of privilege has occurred. Incidents involving the obstruction, such as traffic barriers, security cordons, a union picket line, either impede members' access to the parliamentary precinct or blocking their free movement within the precinct, as well as occurrences of physical assault, have been found to be a prima facie cases of privilege, end quote. That's on page 110. And from there, 2 further pages of the book are dedicated to summarizing the prima facie cases of privilege, which speakers have found over the past 4 decades related to members' access being fettered by protests, strikes, inflexible security arrangements. And given that those clear-cut facts of each case are an equally clear principle, Speaker's rulings on questions of privilege of this nature have typically been prompt and concise. The several reports of the Standing Committee on the Procedure and House Affairs, or from Procedure and House Affairs, which often followed, are richer in content and help us understand the issue at hand. And I would believe that it would be useful to review briefly some of those principles. In reporting to the House on two questions of privilege arising from the federal public service strike, the Procedure and House Affairs Committee explained at paragraph 15 in its 66th report presented in April of 1999, quote, one of the privileges of members of the House of Commons is a right to unimpeded access to Parliament and the parliamentary precincts. Exactly. And members are entitled to go about their parliamentary business undisturbed and cannot be prevented from entering the chamber or a committee room of a parliamentary proceeding. This privilege can be traced back to at least the early 18th century. The 18th century. And this is part of the heritage of all legislative bodies that trace their origins back to the British parliamentary tradition. It is based on the preeminent right of the House to the attendance and service of its members, and any obstruction of members constitutes a breach of privilege and a contempt of the House of Commons, end quote. In the same committee, following a different question of privilege, it is said in the 21st report presented in the House in December of 2004, quote, the denial of access to members of the House, even if temporary, is unacceptable, and it constitutes contempt of the House.
Right.
Members must not be impeded or interfered with while on the way to the chamber or when going about their parliamentary business. To preempt this, it would interfere with the operation of the House of Commons and undermine the preeminent right of the House to service of its members, end quote. The report, Madam Speaker, was concurred in the House on May 17th, 2005. The Procedure and House Affairs Committee later wrote, this time in the 26th report in May of 2012, quote, as a part of parliamentary privilege, members of the House of Commons have the right to unimpeded and unfettered access to the parliamentary precincts and are entitled to go about their parliamentary duties and functions undisturbed without any form of interference.
Right.
Parliament Hill, and most notably Centre Block and the Peace Tower, represent for Canadians the physical embodiment of our parliamentary democracy, and as such, the grounds of Parliament Hill have become the preferred site of individuals and groups for peaceful gatherings and manifestations. The Canadian values and culture, as embodied notably in the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, encourage rather than deter such exercise of fundamental rights of expression and association. And the symbolism of Parliament Hill has, however, made it potential target for those with malicious and illegal intentions, and to the security posture on Parliament Hill, therefore, must be adjusted to meet those threats, end quote. You will recall, Madam Speaker, that the Globe and Mail's comment about Madam Wasser that I quoted earlier, who, quote, said in an interview that the Confederation building was chosen for the protest because it is a building where many parliamentarians conduct their business, and protesters wanted to bring that usual business on Parliament Hill to a halt.
Exactly.
And going back to that 2012 report of the committee, it restated the obligations and expectations of access to Parliament Hill, including the observation, quote, first, members of the House of Commons should not, in any case, be denied or delayed access to the Hill or the precinct. That is exactly what happened on Tuesday morning, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. I just want to remind the member she is repeating a lot of what she has already said, and I just want to remind the member that we expect members to be brief in bringing new information to the matter at hand, or to discussing the matter at hand. And when they're starting to get repetitive, then I'm going to have heard enough, and I want to allow others to who have risen on this here. But I do want to just indicate that Speaker Scheer, in April 30th, 2012, and also Acting Speaker Devlin, June 13th, 2012. I can also quote Assisting Deputy Speaker Anthony Rhoda, all who have indicated that the Speaker has a right to terminate that discussion, and that it does not mean that any member rising on the question of privilege has unlimited time on the floor. I just want to remind the member to please be brief with anything else that she wishes to add. The honourable member for Thornhill.
Madam Speaker, I'm talking about a serious issue where the security of members and the breach of privilege of members of this House would have occurred. And I've brought you multiple examples from multiple different reports and different rulings and different reports within the Procedure and House committees. And I'm stating those in order to provide you with the maximum context for you to be able to rule on this question of privilege. A question of privilege that impeded members of this House, your own colleagues, Madam Speaker, from doing their work, entering their offices, having meetings, and potentially having their safety breached in this place. And I would expect that members of this House would take that seriously, because if this is not a question of privilege, I'm not sure what is.
Exactly.
But similar points have also been made, and sometimes word for word, by this committee. And I'll state another report, the 34th report. It was presented in March of 2015. Another one in the 34th report, this time presented in 2017. In responses to the 2015 question of privilege, where concerns were raised about a 74-second delay for a shuttle bus, truly rose to a case of a prima facie breach of privilege. So if a delayed bus was found to be a breach of privilege, then I'm not sure how 130 people sitting in the lobby impeding access to members of Parliament, members of this House, to enter this place, do their work, enter their offices and feel safe. I'm not sure why you wouldn't be able to hear that as a question of privilege in its entirety.
Now, the honourable member seems to be challenging the chair on what I have just said. As I've indicated to the member, there was some items that she was bringing forward that was repetitive, and I just wanted to let her know that, you know, the orders of the procedures is that the honourable members, when they present questions of privileges, they're all important questions of privileges, and that the summary be as brief as possible, because there are other members as well who want to weigh in on that. And so, again, the point of order, the honourable member for Grand Prairie, Mackenzie.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I think it was inadvertent, but the Honourable Speaker used the proper name of a sitting member of Parliament when quoting the former Speaker. I'm wondering if the Speaker wants to clarify the rules with regards to naming the proper name of currently elected members of Parliament.
I stand corrected. I shouldn't have used his name. I should have just used his riding of Regina Capel. The honourable member for Thornhill. We'll have to start over. We'll have to continue after the orders of the day here, which is we're going.
I just want to remind members, as I recognize the member, on a question of privilege is expected to be brief and concise in explaining the event. The Speaker will hear the member and may permit others who are directly implicated in the matter to intervene. The Speaker has also the discretion to seek advice from other members to help him or her determine whether there is prima facie matter of privilege involved in which would warrant giving the matter priority consideration over the House of Business. When satisfied, the Speaker will terminate the discussion. The honourable member for Thornhill.
Mr. Speaker, I left off talking about two reports in the committee. The 34th report, one presented in 2015 and the other one in 2017. But in response to the 2015 question of privilege, which concerns were raised whether a 74-second delay for a shuttle bus rose to the level of a prima facie breach of privilege. One of your predecessors, Mr. Chair, ruled that on May 12, 2015, at page 1,379 of the debates, quote, in this light, emphasizing the notion of balance, questions raised by the Leader of the Government in the House of Commons are pertinent with regard to defining what constitutes an impediment or to unfettered access for members of the parliamentary precincts and buildings. It would be indeed unfortunate for members to carry the concept of physical obstruction to illogical and unreasonable lengths. However, I would caution that the House ought to not either to fall into the trap of assessing these matters on a sole basis of the duration of the delay or the impediment. One can easily imagine a situation where even a very brief obstruction, depending on its severity or nature, could lead a speaker to arrive at a prima facie finding of privilege and to allow the debate in the House, end quote. And most recently, Mr. Speaker, Regan, on April 6th, 2017, at page 10,251 of the debate said, quote, the importance of the matter of members' access to the precinct, particularly when there are votes for members to attend, cannot be overstated. It bears repeating that even a temporary denial of access, whether there is a vote or not, cannot be tolerated. Obviously, these kinds of incidents, which have given rise to the issue now before us, have all been too frequent, end quote. The 2017 report from that same committee, the Procedure and House Affairs Committee, which followed that particular ruling, meanwhile noted, quote, in line with past precedents, the committee strongly believes that the right of unimpeded access for parliamentarians to the parliamentary precinct is of utmost importance, and that the obstruction or interference with members engaged in parliamentary business cannot be condoned, end quote. The relevant precedents are, I would respectfully submit, numerous and unequivocal, and I've laid them out in this. A temporary denial of access for MPs to the parliamentary buildings cannot be accepted and must be addressed, Mr. Chair. What is unique here, Mr. Speaker, is that parliamentarians were actually part of this protest in an effort to impede and obstruct the work of fellow parliamentarians, members of this House. It is also, I believe, part of a broader pattern of unhinged behavior on the part of New Democrat MPs, though I know that that is already a matter to which you, Mr. Chair, are currently deliberating on, given their behavior in the House late last week. It's also a continuation of the very tactics that we have seen on our streets from the unhinged mob who think that their petty grievances allow them to target Jewish neighborhoods or firebomb Jewish schools or obstruct synagogues and wreak havoc on our Canadian values while abiding and abetting groups that are designated as terrorists in this country. But, Mr. Speaker, it's essential to recall that this issue and this question of privilege is not about some politicians looking out for their self-interest, but rather, as Bosque and Gagnon articulate on pages 59 and 60, quote, the privileges of the Commons are designed to safeguard the rights of each and every elector. Later on page 60 of that same book, Bosque and Gagnon, quote, the 20th edition, Erskine-May's parliamentary procedure, quote, the privileges of Parliament are rights which are absolutely necessary for the due execution of its powers. They are enjoyed by individual members because the House cannot perform its functions without unimpeded use of the services of its members, end quote. A similar point is made by Mango at page 12. Mr. Speaker, Canadians send us here to Parliament to represent them and speak out in the impassioned debates of the day. And in doing so, they also expect us to comport ourselves in a professional way. And that does not, of course, include engaging in illegal, disruptive, harassing, and potentially threatening conduct towards our own colleagues and the institution of Parliament. It definitely does not include interrupting the delay and the business of Parliament by not letting MPs walk into their own office buildings. And it definitely
I think I have a point of order from the Honourable Member for New Westminster Burnaby.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm just referring to our procedural Bible, and Conservative MPs may not be aware of this. But very clearly on page 144, questions of privilege for which written notice have been given are raised at specific times. For example, namely on the opening of the sitting following routine proceedings, but not before, but before orders of the day. In that sense, she's not in order speaking now to the question of privilege. We would have to complete routine proceedings and then move prior to orders of the day, move back to, hopefully, because she's being very repetitive, hopefully her completing the question of privilege.
Just because the Honourable Member started her point of privilege prior to being interrupted by orders of the day, so question period and then such, that this is her first opportunity to be able to continue to, because it's a continuation of her original speech, I will allow it. The Honourable Member for Thornhill. Point of order, Member for Timmins James Bay.
It's because I was here when the member began, and the Speaker then had reminded the House that on a point of privilege, it had to be focused and it wasn't to be used as a filibuster. It seems that we're repeating and repeating. You have also said that. I believe we've passed the point and we're way past it. It seems that this is a tactic as opposed to someone who's actually concerned about their rights being upended.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, and I will caution the Honourable Member Thornhill to maybe make closing arguments on this one. The Honourable Member for Thornhill.
I'm happy to, but I understand why the NDP don't want to hear about a breach of privilege that their members were involved in. It's certainly, I'm going to continue. What this breach of privilege is certainly doesn't include indefinitely occupying a building where MPs were blocked as business as usual. And I will close with this, Mr. Speaker. The protest in itself, I would submit, is a contempt of this House. And it is unprecedented that the engagement of NDP MPs in such behavior must be called out at every single opportunity, and I believe itself rises to contempt. We must stand up on behalf of these sacred traditions and the rights of this place, and on behalf of democratic values that we share as Canadians. And should you agree with me, I am prepared, Mr. Speaker, to move an appropriate motion to instruct the Procedure and House Affairs Committee to get to the bottom of this issue and recommend the appropriate accountability. I will end with this. To all of those protesters who were in there, you will have to remember that you will not silence members of Parliament. And with those NDP MPs joining that protest, they will never silence the voice of those who stand up for freedom-loving Canadians in this country, ever.
Now, there's a number of people that want to intervene on this particular case, and I will go online first. The honourable member for Battleford Lloydminster, then I'll go to New Westminster Burnaby.
Thank you, Speaker. I just want to start off by saying that I am wearing a House-approved headset, and I am rising to add to the point of privilege that was raised by my colleague from Thornhill. I also do just want to note that I'm deeply offended by the previous interventions in regards to this point of order from the member from Timmins James Bay. For him to suggest that this is a filibuster tactic is completely disrespectful. My safety, my staff's safety was jeopardized on Tuesday, and that is not acceptable. And these events need to be looked at further by the Speaker. So I just want to run down what had happened that morning with me. I had arrived to the front of Confederation Building, and I had my children with me on this day, which is not something that I normally do, but for some reason I did. I brought them with me. I had noticed that there was more of a presence of security, but I honestly didn't think anything of it until I went to go into the building. I was stopped by PPS, who told me, you can't go in there. There is about 100 people who have stormed the building and are now occupying it. I obviously am being alarmed by this. He went over to speak to another officer who then said that I could go into the building, that it would be safe for me, even though I question this because my office building is located on the first floor in Confederation. I was told, don't worry, it's just a passive occupation. My children and I were then escorted by PPS around the building. We entered through the accessible entrance. Once I was in my office, I already had staff there. She was advised by PPS to keep the door locked as we could hear chanting and singing, which was very uneasy for us, not knowing what was going on. Knowing that protesters also had passed the entrance of the security portion of Confederation, and some were standing outside of the door of the member for Thornhill's office. This was very concerning for me. My mothering instincts told me this was not a safe place for my children to be with me. I then made the decision that I had to get them out of the building and frankly off the precinct altogether. Obviously that there's not a lot of ways around that building. I had to go through the basement, and I was actually appalled and shocked at the amount of people who were sitting in the accessible entrance going through security. These were stakeholders. These were people, these were Canadians that were coming for meetings. The fact that there was chaos at the front entrance of the building and PPS was still allowing stakeholders into the building and putting them through security, frankly and honestly, is just bananas to me. I don't understand it. I don't understand how with chaos erupting, it'd be a good idea to add more chaos, and this time with Canadians who might not necessarily be familiar with Parliament Hill, but are here to meet with MPs. I eventually got my children out and away from the building. I still had staff in the building, so I felt like I had an obligation to go back to my office. I then had another staff member from
See a point of order from the honourable member for New Westminster Brady.
Thank you very much, Madam Mr. Speaker. I mean, the reality is, for question of privilege, it has to be concise. It has to deal with the question of privilege that has been raised. At the same time, members, if you believe it's a prima facie case of privilege, then have the opportunity to make speeches such as the member is making now, which is perfectly legitimate after a ruling. The ruling obviously won't come today because we will want to examine the record and respond. So I would ask you to keep the question of privilege to the privilege and not allow for speeches that are more properly the domain only after you have ruled.
I thank the honourable member for that intervention. I see the Deputy Whip of the Conservative.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. With regards to that point of order, a personal first-hand account is very much part of the information that the Speaker must hear. It isn't frivolous. It isn't repetition. The member is speaking about a personal experience that is unlike anybody else's experience. That member has the right, but not only the right, but the obligation to ensure that the details of her experience are detailed with regards to this matter. I think that my colleague in the NDP, if it was one of his members that had had this experience with their children, that he would be stopping at nothing to ensure that that voice was heard. So today, more than ever, I would hope that members of Parliament would allow my colleague with her, who has testimony about her experience with her children, to be heard today.
And we're getting all kinds of points of order again here. So I'm going to start with the Honourable Deputy House Leader, and then I'll go down.
Just clarification, Mr. Speaker. Are we talking about something that recently happened in a parliamentary building, or the convoy protest a couple years ago? Because if it's the latter, then I certainly have something to add.
That's getting into debate. I also see the honourable member for Surrey Newton.
I rise today to address the Sikh genocide. There have been consultation among the parties, and I believe you will find unanimous consent for the following motion: that the House acknowledge and recognize that the crimes committed against Sikhs within India in and following 1984 constitute a genocide.
I'm already hearing a number of no's. All right, so we'll go back to the question of privilege that's happening here. But again, I will. There's a lot going on here all of a sudden. That we just need to be concise in our report of the events, so that we can make a decision. Once we get to there, then of course the Speaker's office will work on whether this is a prima facie case or not. But we want to hear the facts. But we want to hear just the facts so that we can bring that information up. The honourable member for Timmins James Bay.
Yes, I want to follow up on my colleague who just pointed out. When we're bringing these points forward, they have to be clear and concise. They can't be used to stretch out as a filibuster. And everyone's personal experience and what happened to their aunt when they were visiting them and they feel their rights were impeded is not relevant to the question at hand. We have heard about the protest. We know a protest happened. Did that protest, was that undemocratic or was that democratic? Was that the rights of citizens? Was it not the rights of citizens? It's a fairly simple question. Whether people liked demonstrations or not, and whether they felt that personally hurt because there was a demonstration is irrelevant to the question of privilege. And otherwise, we are descending into filibuster.
Anybody else on that? Okay, I'm going to allow the honourable member for Battleford Lloydminster to maybe get going and wrap it up.
Absolutely, Speaker. I think that our safety as parliamentarians, those that are in this place, and also our staff should be the utmost importance in this place. So I will continue. I had a staff member from another member of Parliament's office knock on my door and advise me that PPS is going to be removing protesters and I should keep my door locked because they are bringing them through my hallway. Why did PPS let members, staff in the building in the first place, given there was an occupation that they let in, or that was going on, and that they were not removing these people? Why did PPS not advise me and all the office staff and other members down our hallway of what their plan was? And why did PPS not remove the members of parliament and staff that are down the hallway before they started removing these people who were illegally occupying Confederation Building, making it
Another point of order, the honourable member for Timmins James Bay.
I don't want to raise questions about the judgment of my colleague, but that day we all received a special advisory.
Yep, I got
So
it.
maybe if they don't read a special advisory doesn't mean that they're privileged.
Okay, we're getting into debate. If the honourable member wants to add to the point of privilege, I'll allow him to speak after we've got the speakers list. I know the honourable member for New Westminster Burnaby will be up next on it. The honourable member for Timmins James Bay.
The question, Speaker, this is new because saying that the PPS failed this member is a false claim when we received the app warning. So.
Okay. The honourable member for I'm going to let the honourable member for Timmins James Bay to finish up. Then I'll go back to the honourable member for Battleford Lloydminster.
Thank you, Speaker. Because it's an important thing that's being introduced here. It's a new element. But if someone doesn't read the warnings that we're being given, that doesn't mean that their rights were impeded. And so that's a false claim, as we all received regular updates on what was happening that day. So I think that, again, if they're attempting to bring in side issues to continue a filibuster, they can't bring in falsehoods about rights that they claim were impeded if they didn't bother to read the messages from PPS.
Okay, and again, like I said, if the honourable member wants to make a further representation when we get to the end of our speakers list, he's more than welcome to add his thoughts to it as well. The honourable member for Battleford Lloydminster.
Thank you. And I think just in response to that, Mr. Speaker, the member for Timmins James Bay should be very careful on what he's saying. The timing that I came to the office was basically the time that we received the situational advisory. I had 2 children with me. There was no way for me to be able to be doing everything at once. So to be checking my email, walking with my kids, entering the building. So I would just ask not to be putting context that he doesn't know into what I am saying. So through my window where my office is, I could see that protesters were being removed from the Confederation building, were not willingly being removed, and resisted their removal. So this was not peaceful. I know that there are people, staff members of Parliament who were physically here and who witnessed and remember the terrorist attack that happened in Centre Block in 2014. This incident that just happened this week is triggering for those who were here, who experienced that event, and not to mention that those who this was their first time feeling this unsafe in what was supposed to be a safe place. What was most uneasy to me about this is that Global News reported on November 12th, 2024, and their headline being, quote, "Teens accused of plotting to bomb pro-Israel rally on Parliament Hill." So with that information being fresh in my mind, the fact that I have a Jewish colleague whose office is near me, this is the environment we are in. The fact that anti-Semitism is violently on the rise in this country, this is the
Point of order. Point of order, the honourable member for Timmins James Bay.
Thank you. Well, we do know that the protesters call themselves Jews Against Genocide. I find it very concerning that they're attempting to claim that because someone who is of a Jewish faith was in a building where there was a protest by people who call themselves Jews Against Genocide is somehow an anti-Semitic threat. This is really taking us down a dark path, Speaker. You have the obligation to hear whether it's credible or not. And
okay, we are getting far. We are getting far into debate here. We are far too deep into debate on this one. So I will recognize the honourable member for Battleford Lloydminster, but I will ask her to wrap things up. So I know there's a few other people on the list that want to speak.
So this going on in the country, across the country, this is the backdrop I have in my mind and what's going through my mind and trying to figure out, is this safe or is this not safe? And this was described as a passive sit-in protest, which it was not. I heard the yelling, I heard the chanting, and I felt the intimidation. To have one of my children feel scared for his mom, asking if it's okay for her to stay in the building if I'm going to be safe at work because of what he witnessed. That's unacceptable for anybody in this country when they go to work. How was this not taken more seriously, given any one of those who were protesting could have had a different motive, could have had different intent? And again, I will ask the Speaker to read the article that I referred to earlier. This place, this institution must be safe and a peaceful place. This was not the case. And to hear in an intervention before me from the member of Thornhill that members of Parliament, specifically that the New Democrats joined in this occupation and then boasted about it, is absolutely disgusting. And I believe this is added evidence that the New Democrats are not only contributing.
Okay, we have another point of order. The honourable member for Timmins James Bay.
Well, now we're being accused of supporting intimidation when we just had a Conservative tell us that he'd be punching people in the mouth as he walked out.
Yes.
Speaker, you're allowing this to descend.
This is debate. This is debate.
Okay.
Bringing her
So
children.
we're getting into okay. We are descending far too deeply in debate. Like I said like the previous time, we have two people less. All right, I'm going to ask the honourable member for Battleford Lloydminster to finish up, because I know I have two other people that do want to speak to this as well. So please finish up, the honourable member.
Thank you, Speaker. This is what I've been trying to do. I have literally 3 sentences left. So as I was saying, I believe this is added evidence that the New Democrats are not only contributing to the hostile work environment in the lobby, in the opposition lobby, and in the House of Commons, but among the—
Point of order, the honourable member for Timmins James Bay.
Thank you. I hope you allow me to at least speak, because for us to be drawn into this as New Democrats, we had nothing to do with the protest. This is a spurious political.
Okay, I'm not here. I can't. Could you hold on a sec? Because I can't hear you. I can't hear you either. So I'm just going to ask the honourable members to quiet down just a little bit so they can hear the honourable member for Timmins James Bay. Timmins James Bay.
What's clear is this had nothing to do with her worry about her children. This was a spurious attack on New Democrats.
Yep.
We have nothing to do with a protest. They don't like the protest. They're using this filibuster to attack us. I ask you, Speaker, to reject it totally. This is not a credible point of order, privilege, because it's being targeted against MPs who weren't in the building, who weren't in the city, who had nothing to do with it. It is being targeted by the Conservatives because they are trying to draw us into a fight that we had nothing to do with. That is not privilege. That's an abuse of my rights as a parliamentarian. I'm asking you to shut this down.
Yeah.
Okay, so I will say I have heard enough from the honourable member for Battleford Lloydminster. I will go to the next person, which is
Speaker. I have asked the Speaker.
And
like I said, I have 2 sentences left. That's all I have.
I've said that I've heard enough, and I can move on to the next speaker. I know, but I've said I've had enough. It's causing disorder in the House, so I have to move on to the next person.
But that's not fair, because
The honourable member for I have another point of order from the honourable member for Miss. Oh. Okay, I'm going to stop for a second because I see a number of people standing on points of order. I see the honourable member for Grand Lake Miramichi.
Mr. Speaker, I think what's important here, and to the point of order across the way here, this was not passive. It was illegal. They targeted one of the members of Parliament. Some of those moronic thugs went right outside of her door and protested. They were in there illegally, nothing passive about it. These people, and you know what I heard? I heard they got arrested, more than 15 of them, and I heard they got banned for 5 years from the precinct. That's what happens when you commit something illegal. And the NDP helped them too.
Okay, another point of order, the honourable member for New Westminster Burnaby.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a bit disturbing to me when you saw Conservatives cheering on the 3-week occupation in downtown Ottawa, the jeering and the threats of members of Parliament, and not a single Conservative member of Parliament ever raised that as a question of privilege. In fact, they tried to block questions of privilege coming from other members of Parliament. Mr. Speaker, as you have ruled in the past, the member from Thornhill has raised frivolous questions of privilege. That is the ruling that you have made in the past. We will consult, of course, what was said, and we will come back on Monday on this issue. I don't believe it's prima facie a case at all, but I do want to give the member the benefit of the doubt that maybe she has changed from previous frivolous questions of privilege, and we will come back on Monday.
Go to Northumberland, Peterborough South, then I'll go back to James Bay.
I rise to defend the right of the member to finish off her statement. She said she had 2 more sentences. Boscan Gagnon, it's clear that privilege takes priority over nearly all matters. She was not repetitive. She was telling a story about her children. She was literally crying at points. My goodness, we have to decide, are we parliamentarians or are we humans?
Timmins James Bay on this last round.
Yeah. Well, Mr. Speaker, we saw the pattern. The member Miramichi just repeated it. He accused New Democrats of threatening and attacking people when we had nothing to do with it. So I ask you, Speaker, ask him to withdraw that comment because it was a false comment. We had nothing to do with this. He came in here to no, I'm speaking.
But this is getting into debate even beyond what the point of privilege is, the question of privilege is right now. This is getting beyond what the point of privilege is actually about. The point of order. The Honourable Deputy Whip for the Conservatives.
So much. With regards to the last comment that New Democrats somehow were not involved in this, there's obviously multiple news reporting with regards to not only members of Parliament but also staffers of the New Democratic Party. There's pictures as well, Mr. Speaker, which I'd like to the right to reserve to turn into this House so that the Speaker can review those documentations as well as the photos that were taken during that entire episode.
Order. No. I see the honourable member for Chatham-Kent-Leamington, and then hopefully I'll get back on track here.
On the same point of privilege, I want to add a first-hand testimony.
Sorry, the honourable member for. There's a lot going on here today. The honourable member for Longueuil-Charlebourne.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to suggest that all other questions be reserved.
So ordered. Point of order. So Chatham-Kent-Leamington, I recognize the honourable member.
On the same point of privilege that we've been discussing, I too was trying to access my office that morning and was prevented access to the building by the Parliamentary Precinct Service. I was intending to go to my office to work to meet with stakeholders. I did make my way around to the back through the basement, and again, as previous interventions have outlined, a number of stakeholders were in the basement. And unfortunately, instead of talking about AIDS, malaria, and tuberculosis with stakeholders that morning, we spoke about how our building was being taken over. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Okay, and I think now the 2 sentences of the honourable member for Lloydminster, Battleford Lloydminster.
So, Mr. Speaker, I will close with this. Security of all staff, members of Parliament, and those who are visiting this institution to see how our democracy works and to visit the heart of the nation must be taken seriously. And I ask the Speaker to look through the lens of those who are intimidated, traumatized, and scared for their safety, and that he also review the procedures that were used and put in place by PPS that day, address the flaws and gaps, and ensure occupations like this will never happen again on Parliament Hill and in the precinct.
Okay, thank the honourable member. Now, another set of points of order, I guess, that are going on. The honourable member for Nepean.
Mr. Speaker, a few minutes back, member from Surrey Newton introduced a motion seeking unanimous consent, and I said no. I believe on the way out of this chamber, the member threatened that I will be yeffed up. So another member also aggressively accosted me in the lobby. I feel that as a member of Parliament, I should be able to express my opinion, my views freely in the House, and I should not be felt threatened by any words or actions of my fellow members.
Thank the honourable member for bringing that forward. I guess we'll talk to the honourable member about the proper way to look into that particular issue. Also, we have the honourable member for Spadina Fort York on a point of order.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm rising as on the matter of privilege raised by the member for Thornhill. Just like her, just like the member for Battleford's Lloydminster, as well as the member for Chatham-Kent-Leamington, my office is in the Confederation Building, and I'm rising in support of the case put forward by the member that privilege was indeed breached. Moreover, Mr. Speaker, I would encourage you to consider the alarming report of 3 NDP MPs as witting abettors and accomplices to what was a clear breach of privilege and contempt of Parliament and our sacred traditions. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Okay, and the honourable member for South Shore St. Margaret's.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise on the same point of privilege raised by the member for Thornhill. The office of which Canadians have elected me to occupy is also in the Confederation building. And on Tuesday, with the illegal protest that happened, which was assisted by 3 members of the NDP, where they targeted the Confederation building because its ease of access outside of the fences of West Block and Centre Block made it an easy target, and therefore the NDP were complicit. I was unable to presume or to do the duties of members of Parliament that I had. I had a meeting scheduled that day with the ambassador from Israel in my office to discuss the issues going on in the Middle East, and the ambassador canceled the meeting because his security team felt threatened by this.
Mr. Burnaby.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, again, I get back to jurisprudence. I know Conservatives never consult even the standing orders. They just walk in. But if they actually reviewed the procedural Bible, and if the member reviewed the procedural Bible on page, in the debates 9374, this is a ruling from June 13th, 2012. The Speaker said at this point, in the case of a question of privilege, the floor is not the members. The Speaker has the right to terminate the discussion if the Speaker feels that relevant points to the question of privilege that have not been previously raised have been brought forward. That is
second. So
these are more properly your decision, Mr. Speaker, and I would ask you to uphold the jurisprudence, the traditions of this House, and bring an end to this repetition by Conservatives.
All right. We'll be able to get back to the privilege motion after I do this. So, it being 1:45, pursuant to Standing Order 81-16, it's my duty to put forth with every question necessary to dispose of the business of supply. The question is as follows. Mr. Singh, seconded by Ms. Barron, moves that given that, 1, Canadians are facing an affordability crisis and need more than temporary relief. 2, the government's $250 working Canadian rebate would exclude many workers and other Canadians who need it the most. 3, the 2021 Conservative Party platform included an one-time GST holiday. La Chambre demande.
The House call on the government to A. permanently remove the GST from essential goods, including home heating, grocery meals, internet and mobile phone bills, diapers, and kids' clothes. B. expand the rebate to include all adults whose income is under the threshold and did not earn employment income in 2023, so that people like recent graduates trying to enter the workforce, retired seniors, people with disabilities, injured workers, workers on parental leave, and long-term sick leave, and others in need are included.
By putting in place an excess profit tax targeting the largest and most profitable corporations. If a member participating in person wishes that the motion be carried or carried on division, or if a member of a recognized party participating in person wishes to request a recorded division, I'd invite them to rise and indicate it to the chair. The honourable member for New Westminster Burnaby.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And on the NDP's plan for relief for so many Canadians, we would ask for a recorded vote.
The pursuant to Standing Order 45, the division stands deferred until Monday, December 9th, 2024, at the expiry of time provided for oral questions. And I'm just going to consult right for a second. Okay, just so we know that we're done with routine, orders of the day, and then I will go back to the member.
Orders of the day, ordre du jour, resuming consideration of a privilege motion on the failure to produce documents pertaining to Sustainable Development Technology Canada and on the sub-amendment of Mr. Kelly.
We'll go back to the hearing of the privilege question, and as I've said to all folks that have spoken, to try to bring new relevant information forward and try to be as concise as possible. The Honourable Member of South Shore St. Margaret's.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And it is new information because it's about my experience this past Tuesday, which is new and additional information, in spite of the member from New Westminster Burnaby who chooses to take his orders for the Liberals, who wants to shut down the evidence that his party was complicit in preventing members of Parliament from doing their work who have their offices in the Confederation building. As I was saying, I had scheduled meetings that day, a very important meeting with the ambassador for Israel. I would think that members of Parliament would be concerned when a member of Parliament cannot have a meeting with the representative of another government because of an illegal protest that breached my ability to do my job. Now,
I'm seeing another point of order. The Honourable Member for New Westminster Burnaby.
Again, Conservatives were unconcerned with a 3-week occupation that did just that, disrupted everybody.
Okay, we are getting back into debate, so I just want to make sure that there's a point of order. The Honourable Member for New Westminster Burnaby.
Mr. Speaker, again, I would implore you to follow the judgments in the past, including in 2012, which allow you to determine that you've heard enough on the question of privilege and to allow those speeches, if indeed in the end you decide prima facie there is a question of privilege over the next few days, that then members can contribute their speeches at that time.
The Honourable Member for South Shore St. Margaret's. Like I said, let's just kind of do this quickly.
It does not surprise me that the member for New Westminster Burnaby is trying to prevent the statement of privilege with regard to a meeting with the ambassador of Israel about the conflict in the Middle East. That the NDP would be supportive in helping to organize the prevention of a member of Parliament from doing their duties with a protest that happened out of...
Another point of order, New Honourable Member, New Westminster Burnaby.
A question of privilege, very clearly, Mr. Speaker, has to be on the facts. We have wild speculation and a whole bunch of frivolity brought in by the Conservatives. It is not a bona fide response to a question of privilege. I'd ask you again to cut off the member, and certainly the member has more scope when there is a speech if and when you rule on this, but currently this is not permissible and it doesn't correspond to our procedural Bible.
Member for Kildonan and St. Paul, I think, is standing on the same point of order.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to put a few words and facts on the record concerning the privilege motion put forward by the member for Thornhill.
I try to finish up with the Honourable Member of South Shore St. Margaret's. Then I'll go to Kildonan and St. Paul, and I see another person standing up as well. And like I said, please keep it to new information as quickly as possible, because we really have heard a lot on this issue already. The Honourable Member for South Shore St. Margaret's.
The NDP member suggested that my intervention and how I was prevented from doing my job is frivolous is I need to be able to discuss.
I have the chair for a second. So I'm just the Honourable Member for Kildonan and St. Paul.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. More facts that have not been discussed regarding this privilege debate, and I will be brief. I am the I will just wait my turn. Okay.
When someone stands on a point of order, they have the right to be heard.
And I suffer, and you take away my right to speak with the point of privilege as a result.
Are you challenging me, sir?
Yes.
Do you want to take? I mean, do you really want it? That's what we're trying. I am not removing your responsibility here. There are points of order that are coming up. The Honourable Member of New Westminster Burnaby is standing on points of order. The Honourable Member for Kildonan and St. Paul is now standing on a point of order. The Honourable Member for, well, I understand the Honourable Member is not finished, but I'm also asking the member to get to the point, is what we're trying to do, rather than take an attack. So the attacks are happening from both sides, and it's not helpful to the debate that we're actually having in the chamber right now. So I will allow the Honourable Member for South Shore St. Margaret's to finish up if he wants to get to the points that he's trying to make.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If I am not interrupted again, I can conclude my privilege intervention of how I was prevented from doing my duties as a member of Parliament by the illegal protests that happened. So when an ambassador from a foreign country can't come in the building for their safety, that is a major issue in the administration of our democratic duties and my ability to do my job. And the fact that these protesters were allowed to simply walk into this building with such ease and prevent business and target, specifically by the media reports, to prevent anyone from coming in and doing business with members of parliament, indeed, in fact, preventing from members of parliament from getting into their own office, is a breach of our privilege. And I would ask you to consider all the experience of members of parliament who were subjected to that breach in the Confederation building on Tuesday morning. And I would also ask that you consider the NDP's role in preventing members of parliament from doing their duties.
Thank you very much, sir. The honourable member of Kildonan St. Paul.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll try to be very brief. That is my objective in this, but I did want to put a few points on the record of this for your consideration when considering this privilege question, particularly from a public safety file. As you know, I am the official Shadow Minister for Public Safety, and the RCMP falls under my portfolio that I am accountable to hold the government accountable to. And so my concerns are regarding the protective policing program. And just to read a few words on the record of the government's own documents, that the RCMP's protective policing program is facing significant challenges meeting increased demand for their service, putting unsustainable pressure on the PPP program. And further, that the security and protection are increasing concern due to the significant increase in the number of threats against public figures. I did feel responsible to ensure the public safety aspect of this is put on the record, because we don't know who those individuals are. We do know who the NDP members are who are supporting them, but we don't know who the other members are. And the idea that walking into our offices, sir, that we would have individuals blocking our way, that we don't know who they are, and their purpose there was to block us from going into our offices. If we allow this to transpire, that this is allowed, that there could be these sit-ins in our offices, sir, I do believe it would raise considerable safety concerns, in particular, given the concerns raised by the government's own documents, the reason we have the protective policing program in the first place. And I will just add, I can't use props, but MPs are able to carry panic buttons for a reason.
We have a point of order. The honourable member for New Westminster Burnaby.
Again, Mr. Speaker, this is not directly on the question of privilege and prima facie. This is involving other programs. Perfectly reasonable to bring up if and when you rule on this in speeches. It is not appropriate at this time when you've heard the question of privilege. Conservatives don't seem to understand the rules. You can imagine if they...
Okay, no, I will say to the honourable member for Kildonan St. Paul, I understand the information coming, but I just want to make sure that we're very concise and make it quick.
I'm not speaking quickly enough to the standard of the NDP member, but I will speak on this. I would say just that in your consideration, I do believe the Speaker should consult with the PPP program, the director of that program, for those considerations, because I do have grave concerns in this regard, sir, that it increases the public, or the threat, the access that individuals have, the idea that they can come do a sit-in right in our offices or right outside our offices and block us from going to work. I think if we allow this to happen with no consequences, this could be part of, so I ask that you consider consulting the RCMP on the threat analysis if this is allowed to be permitted, sir. So please ensure that's part of your consideration.
Right. Thank the honourable member for Kildonan St. Paul. The honourable member for Edmonton St. Albert.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wish to very briefly add some additional information in respect to the question of privilege raised by my colleague, the member for Thornhill. Specifically, the member for Thornhill cited 3 NDP MPs who were actively involved in this illegal anti-Israel protest. And I would add that there was a 4th member of the NDP who was involved.
Honourable member for New Westminster Burnaby.
Again, this is debate, Mr. Speaker. I say this with due respect. I do understand Conservatives don't read the standing orders. They haven't read the procedural Bible. They love to cause mayhem, but this is not directly...
I know I've got 2 people on my list now. I want to make sure that the honourable member for St. Albert Edmonton finishes things up, and I just
The honourable member for Joliette. also wants to speak to this.
Mr. Speaker, it is highly pertinent insofar as that there were NDP MPs who were actively involved in facilitating this illegal anti-Israel protest, and contrary to...
And I see for New Westminster Burnaby.
This is debate, Mr. Speaker.
And I'm tending to agree there. London of the Deputy.
The Honourable Member for Joliette. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What a day at this House. I've never seen this, so I'll try. As you would note, there's unanimous consent to see the clock at 3 p.m.
Okay, je pense que...
I think the Honourable Member for Joliette is asking for unanimous consent to see the clock at 3 p.m. Everyone agrees?
To see the clock at 3 o'clock? Yeah. See the clock at 3 o'clock. Agreed? It's agreed. Having reached the expiry of the time provided for today's debate, the House will resume consideration of the privilege motion at 11 a.m. on Monday, December 9, 2024. Pursuant to Standing Order 94, I wish to inform honourable members that private members' business will be suspended that day. It being 3 o'clock, the House stands adjourned until next Monday, 11 a.m., pursuant to Standing Order 24-1.